online. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Concerto Köln's rehearsal space in the Early Music Centre in Cologne. My name is Fiona Stevens. I'm the General Manager of Concerto Köln, and I'm here to welcome you to our workshop. I'm very sorry about the delay, just in case you tried to watch at 2 p.m. where we had technical issues. I think we've solved them. The string players of Concerto Köln are joined today by members of the Duisburg Philharmonic Orchestra for our second series of performance practice workshops, which are funded by a grant from the German Federal Cultural Ministry. This week, we're going to be looking at 19th century performance practice. You may have followed our romantic performance practice project centred around Wagner, which ran from 2019 to 2021, and which we are continuing in collaboration with the Dresden Festival Orchestra. Well, today we're going to take a closer look at an all-pervasive musical language that Wagner knew and had an ambivalent relationship with, and which heavily influenced the 19th century musical world, Belcanto. We're delighted to welcome Jakob Lehmann, a practitioner researcher, conductor and violinist from Berlin, who's going to guide us through this, for us, this new chapter of 19th century performance practice. Together with Will Crutchfield in New York, Jakob is at the forefront of research into and the application of Belcanto performance practice, from the instruments used, the orchestral setup in an opera pit, to the vocal technique employed. I hope we will have a very nice time, our viewers online. Contact us on the back channel, and I'm going to give you over to Jakob now. Thank you, Jakob.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy for this invitation by Fiona and by Alex to participate in this workshop week with something that is very close to my heart and close to my, let's call it everyday practice of music making. When Fiona approached me to do this talk and this workshop day, I had already presented a talk that I thought was going to be similar to the one today, about the historical informed aspects of Belcanto, especially the music by Gioacchino Rossini, which was a day that we planned together with the German Rossini Society back in October last year, when I was doing a production of Rossini's opera L'Italiana and Algeri in Berlin with my group Eroica Berlin. And Fiona came to this and said, well, why don't you present this also at our workshop week? And then we talked about it, and then I talked to Alex, and he said, well, yeah, that's great, but can you also make the connection to the stuff that we actually do in the music and the repertoire that we're actually playing? Wagner, Brahms, Schumann, all these people. And I thought, okay, I'll take the challenge, because I hadn't looked at this topic from that angle. And I have to say, many rabbit holes later, I'm here today, and I'm very happy to be presenting this very broad topic, and I hope that I will give you a kind of comprehensive overview of what I believe are the connections between Belcanto, or what we call Belcanto, and the music of other countries and, in the Romantic era. And this talk will be structured in a way that I will first talk about what is this word, Belcanto, what does it mean, what does it entail. I will talk about what the world of Italian opera was like in the first half of the 19th century. I will talk a little bit about, the general aspects of performance practice, orchestra sizes, orchestra balances, orchestra placements, and the like. Then I will talk about what Fiona had already mentioned, people who were in constant contact with this music but had a love-hate relationship with it, Wagner and his contemporaries, mostly German. We will, hear some really gnarly German comments about the style, and then I would like to draw the line and see what is actually traceable of that influence of both the way of writing music and also the way of performing it in the German Romantic or late Romantic school. And then, of course, since we all have our instruments with us, there's three pieces that I would like to have a look with you. These are all examples of slow music, if I can just break it down to that. It is cantabile music, slow movements or sections from larger works, in which I think this, let's call it Italian influence, is palpable and also, feelable, in a way, in playing. I have to say up front, I'm not a musicologist, I am a musician, and I'm looking at everything from a musician's perspective, from the perspective of somebody who is certainly a fan of musicology, and I really am, but I am not a musicologist myself. I'm heavily indebted to a lot of people who have taught me many things, and I have to mention Will Crutchfield first, who is a real musicologist, conductor and festival director in New York, with whom I have been working since 2018, and who has been working on this for decades. And I'm very grateful to Will for supplying me with many examples, of early recordings that I will play for you today, and which are, hard to find under normal circumstances. In some instances, not all. Okay, let's crack into it. The question is, what is Belcanto? What does that mean? What does it entail? And I want us to listen to a lot today, so I hope the Bose soundbar works in the middle of the orchestra. And let's just have a look at this, and let's listen to something that I think most people on this world would connect to the word Belcanto. First question, is the sound okay? Is it loud enough?
Good.
Can everybody hear it? Okay. So that is a typical example of what we would think is Belcanto. Does anybody want to just give a few ideas of what did we just hear? What could be a characteristic of style here?
Legato.
Legato, yes.
Legato.
Very important.
Vibrato.
Yes, we'll talk about that later, yeah. Yeah.
What was that?
Hmm?
The Portamenti.
Portamento,
Was,
yeah.
Rubato.
Rubato, yes. All the good stuff, huh? For romantic performance practice. There is another example that I would just like to give just right after this, which is from the same opera and same recording. And I would like us to listen for differences in mood, character. So I would think that even though, if we don't understand a single word of Italian, we could say that those two examples are of different dramatic situations in this opera. By what is that brought to the listener? Is it the notes Is it the actual harmonics? Is it the orchestration? I wouldn't say so. It's both F major examples. Both have a very similar build. There is a line in the soloist voices, in the singer's voices. There is an accompaniment which is very simple. It's just broken chords. If we look back at the first example, it's just basically, it's almost the same. It looks the same on the page, except that this is 12/8 and this is 4/4. But still, we are able to get a different message by those two things. And I think there we have already a very important aspect of that style. Is, I would call it, and it's dangerous to say that, but I would say simplicity in orchestration, and a large focus on the singer or the singing parts, but still a lot of it is connected to who is singing it and how. How are the words being said? How is the text being brought across? And here we also have already one of the biggest criticisms of this style. Everything sounds the same. If it's sad or happy, it's all the same. I couldn't disagree more, but I'm also so deep in that style, which I have loved all my life and which I've now for many years performed as an active musician. But those are just two very typical examples. And also saying that I was playing this very classical recording of Maria Callas, which is already almost 70 years old, but still considered, one of the top recordings of that style. I will concentrate on much earlier recordings in the next examples. But that is just to show you this is the world's idea of what Belcanto is. So let's look at just a general definition. Belcanto from the Grove Dictionary. The term Belcanto refers to the Italian vocal style of the 18th and early 19th centuries, the qualities of which include perfect legato production throughout the range, the use of a light tone in the higher registers, and agile and flexible delivery. More narrowly, it is sometimes applied exclusively to Italian opera of the time of Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti. In either case, Belcanto is usually set in opposition to the development of a weightier, more powerful and speech-inflected style associated with German opera and Wagner in particular. The term is best limited to its 19th century use as a style of singing that emphasizes beauty of tone in the delivery of highly throated music. I have many thoughts about this, but we will see when I go further along if Belcanto and that style is really in opposition to the German school and Wagner, but we will get to that. A few reading recommendations if you want to go deeper in the history of this. Rodolfo Celletti was an Italian musicologist. He wrote this book, obviously in Italian, La Storia del Belcanto. I have it here also with me in German. Berenreiter has the German version. This is the English version. Whatever language is most convenient to you, you're happy to look into it. That's a very comprehensive study. And he makes the point of, in which I will agree that the style of Italian singing in the first half of the 19th century is actually something that developed from the castrati, from the castrato singers of the Baroque era. And there is many connections between that. I will not go so much into this today because it's we could spend a week on castrato singing and how it influenced later style. But Rodolfo Celletti is, in any case, somebody who really makes a strong case for all these also characteristics of the Baroque art of singing. Another book which is absolutely one of the most important studies on this is the very aptly named Divas and Scholars by Philip Gossett. Philip Gossett was probably the first musicologist who really took this music seriously, would be a very general way of saying it, but he was for many years the general editor of the complete edition of works of Rossini and also of Verdi. He worked closely with the University of Chicago and the Fondazione Rossini in Pesaro, and edited many works and cleared up many mistakes in the performance materials. And this book is actually very fun to read because he doesn't hold back of naming names and colleagues who he encountered in his very long career as musicologist and artistic advisor to many festivals and opera houses. And it's great because he draws the line between musicology, historically informed performance, and the practicability in today's world. Also, the audiences that are involved in this. So, Italian opera was just a huge machinery in the 19th century. It was one of the most prolific outlets of music making and composition that has ever been. I mean, it has already been for many centuries before that, but in the 19th century it really reached its point. And we cannot not talk about this guy, Gioacchino Rossini, who is, you know, if we take the term Belcanto as a narrow field of the three big names, Rossini, Donizetti, Bellini, he is the oldest and probably the most classical of all of them. He really viewed himself as a pupil, and you know, in quotes, a pupil of Mozart and Haydn. He really felt very strongly about classicism and the development of that style. So, of course, his works, some of his most famous works, Il Barbiere di Siviglia, for example, La Cenerentola, L'Italiana in Algeri, these works are played all over the world and, you know, are really standard repertoire. And Barbiere di Siviglia, the Barber of Seville, is the oldest opera that has never left the repertoire. So it is really the earliest piece that never went out of fashion. It was performed since its premiere in 1816 until today. There was never a gap. And with almost all other works, and that includes Mozart, there was sometimes a gap in the 19th century or the early 20th century in some instances. So he was, in his lifetime or in his career, the most famous, celebrated, and successful composer in the world. He was just the most important composer, living composer in the world, in terms of how often his works were played, where they were played, and all these considerations. He was, as I said, very closely connected to the classicism. He stopped writing opera at a quite early age, 37. He lived quite a long life, but he felt that his style was no longer the order of the day, and he left the scene while people still were asking for more. So, but his influence is traceable to so many different, you know, to so many different styles, and everybody, also the people who hated his music, were in touch with it constantly. Next guy, Gaetano Donizetti, slightly younger, 5 years younger than Rossini. He was even more prolific in writing. He wrote over 70 operas. Rossini wrote just 39 operas, and was also immensely popular in his day. Some of his works also almost never left the repertoire. For example, the Elixir of Love, L'Elisir d'Amore, or Don Pasquale, or Lucia di Lammermoor. Those are just works that have never quite left the repertoire. He is especially important, and that's why I included him as a composer in the pieces that we will try out today. He had strong connections to Vienna in Austria. He was Hofkapellmeister in Vienna for a short while, for two years in the 1840s. So he was really at the forefront of, you know, in the city where Beethoven lived, and then he was the Hofkapellmeister. So there's an interesting connection there. So Donizetti we will talk about a little more later. And the third one in the trio, Vincenzo Bellini, a little younger, again, lived a very short but very, very successful life. He wrote even less operas. He wrote only 11 operas in his lifetime because he really wanted to devise his own style, his own way of caring about the music and the words, and we will get to that later. Of course, Giuseppe Verdi is also somebody who, you know, was born and trained and started to compose in that Belcanto tradition, if we apply it to this narrow meaning. He, of course, took opera to a completely different, you know, development. He really was part of the whole idea of finding a way in which Belcanto, with its, you know, with its concentration on beauty of tone and virtuoso singing, was coming into a more, let's call it, realistic idea of performance. And then, of course, later we have people like Mascagni, Puccini, who are connected with the term verismo meaning truth. Often today we think of Belcanto and verismo as opposites. One is only about the beauty of tone and the other one is about people shouting at one another on stage. But those two terms are so much more connected than we might think, and I will say something about that later. But composers in those times, and that changed with Verdi but only mid-career, were actually not really at the top of the food chain. Top of the food chain were still the singers, and that is probably true for the whole 19th century. And I'm just going to throw some names at you because they will come up later in my talk and also in the examples. So we have Giovanni Battista Velluti, who was the last castrato. He wasn't really the last castrato, but he was the last of that Baroque tradition of high male voices, you know, the castrated Fach, if we want to call it that, and he was immensely popular. And by the time he had his career and he was very famous, the castrato voice was already considered out of fashion and also unnatural. There's quite a lot of newspaper articles or just period ideas about why it is unethical to like this type of voice. And we have, for example, famous letter of Felix Mendelssohn when he was in London and he listened to Velluti singing under his window and he just was shocked by that style. Interestingly enough, there is somebody who defended Velluti, and that was Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. So there might be a connection there. But Velluti is really an important figure. Rossini and Meyerbeer wrote the last really main operatic parts for orchestrato. Aureliano in Palmira by Rossini and Il Crociato in Egitto by Meyerbeer, which were the last real big, let's call them Baroque traditional roles. We have Isabella Colbran, who is immensely important to Italian opera because she was one of the big prima donnas in her time. She was actually married to Rossini, was Rossini's first wife. He wrote 9 operas for her, and those were just the pinnacle of tragedy on stage. She was a tragédienne, as the French say, and she was immensely popular and very influential. We have Giovanni Battista Rubini, who was one of the first high tenor voices that really brought the tenor voice to the limelight that we still think of it today. In Baroque times, the tenor wasn't as in fashion as it became later in the early Romantic style. And Rubini was really one of the first proponents of that new style. Giuditta Pasta is very important too, and we will know, yeah, I know, Pasta, her name is Pasta. Also a very important singer because of her connection to Bellini. She was, among many other things, she was Bellini's first Norma of the opera that we just heard at the beginning, Sangha Maria Callas. And we have Maria Malibran, who got some, let's call it, popular cultural fame because Cecilia Bartoli had a whole tour and CD and concerts and museums in Attrac about her a couple of years ago, I think in 2008 for her 200th birthday. She was immensely popular, everybody loved her, Chopin heard her, loved her, she was just a huge cultural phenomenon, and she died very young because she fell off her horse, which is very sad, and she died, but she's very important too. Okay. Let's talk again a little bit about the vocal aspects of Belcanto, and I try to make that short, but it's important because that has so many implications also for the instrumental style. This book is immensely important. It is by Manuel Garcia, actually Maria Malibran's elder brother, and it's called L'Art du Chant, as you can see, first published in French in 1840. But translated in the 19th century into all languages that you can possibly imagine. I will quote from the English version later. Manuel Garcia was an incredibly influential vocal pedagogue because he came from that immense tradition. And there we already see he was Spanish. His style of singing or the style of teaching, we would say today, is Italian, but he wrote this book in French. So we already see a kind of sort of international or at least European outlet of that style. There's no contradiction between Spanish, French, or Italian in that matter, and I will go on and go also about the implications for Germany with that. L'Art du Chant, you can find it in every imaginable language, also on IMSLP. It's a book that is still used today with vocal exercises and also a lot of technical stuff. So what for us in romantic performance practice for the violinists is Joachim Moser's violin school is for everybody who is interested in singing Scarpia. He also lived to the ripe old age of 101 years, so he spans just a very, very long time. So what is Belcanto again? And here's just some of the key points for singing. And I'm drawing this from the Young Singers curriculum for the Festival Teatro Nuovo, which I am involved in New York from 2018. So principles of vocal production. Legato, the basic matter of getting from one note to another in a bound or connected fashion, and the further considerations that arise when vocalization is combined with text. So meaning, how do you keep singing legato when you have to actually phonate words? Onset and release, the ability to begin and end any note, whether on a vowel or a consonant, on the desired pitch at the desired dynamic, without unintended vocal events or extraneous pitches. So far so basic, but you would be surprised. Dynamics, the ability to sing both forte and piano with consistent quality throughout your range and to execute the classic messa di voce exercise that both builds and demonstrates this ability. Messa di voce meaning starting in piano, crescendoing and going back to piano in the end. Registration, also very important. Command of the vocal qualities traditionally referred to as head voice and chest voice. We'll get to that later as well. And secure, efficient transition between them. Agility, the execution of florid figures at the greatest velocity your voice can attain while maintaining clarity, legato and sonority. Trill, also very important, the ability to sustain steady, clear, full-voiced execution of an essential ornament that requires separate study because it calls on a vocal function distinct from ordinary agility. Okay, what I think is most important to our purposes of connecting this with instrumental music is the first four, and we will see later what that means and entails. Okay, let's talk just a little bit about what was the state of the day performance, the way of performing in Italy in that time. Because, as I said, huge machinery. The opera houses per season had between 10 and 30 world premieres. So there's just, it's a running system. Everybody is working really hard. And because everybody was just in it so much, there's not so much written down accounts of how to do it and how to get to it. And somebody who's really important in that aspect, because he left the only really that I know book about orchestral practice, is Giuseppe Scaramelli. Giuseppe Scaramelli here announcing himself as a Veneziano, so he comes from Venice, but he spends almost all of his life in Trieste in Italy, where he is the first violin, or primo violino e direttore d'orchestra, which is a very important title, which I will get to in a second, at the Opera House in Trieste. He was just a couple of years younger than Mozart, but he lived until the 1840s. So again, he spends a long time of coming from, let's almost call it a late Baroque tradition, and going into the heights of Verdi's first years. So musical direction in those days in Italy was very different from basically anywhere else. And it's very interesting to look into that and ask yourself why this was. Because Italy was extremely late, or extremely reluctant, one might call it, to adopt the principle of one conductor, one musical director. A stand-up conductor in Italy was still novel in the 1860s. So when people like Spohr and Weber in Germany and Mendelssohn, who brought it to London, were already waving their arms around, in Italy, there was still a very distinct model, and that model was a dual leadership position. One maestro al cembalo, there's many different titles, but those are the most common. Maestro al cembalo, who was usually somebody who worked with the singers in a theater, trained the singers, studied the roles with them. Often that was the composer. For example, when Rossini premiered a new opera, he would usually be the maestro al cembalo. Maestro al cembalo meant that he was sitting in the pit at the keyboard. It wasn't a cembalo, but it was most probably, in many cases, a square piano. And he supervised the performance, but he actually did not do much during the performance. He was mostly, when there was secco recitative, he was playing recit together with cello and bass, and we also talk about recit in a second. But the general musical direction, or the general musical responsibility, lie with the first violinist, the primo violino e direttore, or capo d'orchestra, who was usually a violinist who was employed by the theater, didn't travel around, was in a way, modern word, concertmaster, but with just the general responsibility for directing the orchestra. And as you can imagine, that didn't always go very well if you have two people officially in charge who should theoretically work together. That didn't work always. And we can see here in Scaramelli, let's not go into all of it because I don't want to spend the day only reading, but in Scaramelli's book he writes, he's very clear about what he thinks of cembalists or harpsichordists being the directors. There are some theaters that instead of a simple cembalist have the practice of taking a maestro, and with this it sometimes transpires that someone enchanted by his own mastery, if he finds by chance a primo violino of little spirit, arrogates to himself the title of director of that orchestra, making it understood also that all the orchestra must be subordinate to him, even the primo violino of the same. A director of merit, however, will never have to let himself be thus dominated by such a pretender, or better to say, by such a presumer, and therefore will not yield unless to the composer of the opera himself, in matters, however, regarding the manner in which he wishes to have it executed, while if even he should say something contrary to the good effect of his music, all the worse for him, and it will be his fault, not that of the primo violino. So we see Scaramelli really was in favor of letting the first violinist just do his thing, and the director at the cembalo just turning the pages for the secco recitative. And it corroborates a little bit also in Giovanni Pacini, also a famous composer, in his memoirs, talking about an opera that he performed. At the end of the opera, a subdued hissing was heard throughout this vast auditorium. The reader might feel the state I was in. I had passed the entire evening feeling I was pilloried, since it was still the custom that the composer had to be seated at the harpsichord with no other task than turn pages for the cello and the double bass between hope and fear. So you can imagine if a young composer, especially a young composer, premieres an opera in an opera house where you find somebody like Scaramelli being the director of the orchestra, that young composer didn't have a chance of staying. But of course, there is other models. There is younger violinist directors who would collaborate a little better with the cembalist or the maestro al cembalo. So it wasn't always easy, and I can tell from experience because I also have done operas like this in New York with two people in charge. It has its merits, but it also has its challenges because you constantly have to be moderating, basically. Both parties have to moderate, and it's fascinating to do this music that way, but we can also very heavily understand why at some point even the Italians introduced the conductor, the role of the conductor. And Donizetti actually was one of the first composers who insisted on having the say about musical interpretation themselves. Here's just some examples, and that gives you an idea of how long these people were in office, if we want to call it that. Giuseppe Festa in Naples, over 30 years. Alessandro Rolla in Milan, 30 years. Petrini Zamboni, they don't even know when he started. And Ferdinando Melchiorri, who was a Jesuit priest, 1816, also 20 years in office. And the same for the Maestri al Cembali, who weren't composers in their first, as a first job. They also had quite long careers being in the opera house, like what we call Kapellmeister today, but really concerned with just keeping the system up and running. what I find interesting when we see depictions of this first violinist director or the primo violino or whatever we want to call it, we hardly ever see him play. We often see somebody like this who is just waving his bow around because, you know, to get the attention of singers on stage, it's just, you know, you have to do it some way. Here's another one. I don't know if you see it well, but the guy who's sitting just in front of the stage, also his bow is raised. There's no playing involved. And I can tell you, if you try to play all those first violin lines, which in these operas are not always very easy, you get frustrated very easily with your own playing while still having to keep track of the chorus on stage. So, as I said, I can understand from a, you know, even physical experience that I understand why the conductor was introduced in that repertoire as well. If, you know, there's a wonderful book, which I also have here, if you want to have a look at it, by Martin Fischer-Dieskau, who, you know, the relation is clear, he's the son of Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, wrote this excellent book, Dirigieren im 19. Jahrhundert, der italienische Sonderweg, which just shows exactly how the practice was, where it came from, how it went into, you know, what we would call modern conducting. Okay, so far, so good. Orchestral forces. Now this is very interesting, especially for our double bass colleagues. Because what Scaramelli says, and we will see this corroborated by other evidence, in order for the orchestra to be considered well assembled, one calculates for every 4 violins 1 double bass. Therefore, with 20 violins, one wants 5 double basses, and at least 4 violas, and 2 cellos. One at the cembalo and the other one at the end of the pit. So this is a typical Italian thing, and this is very important to the understanding of how these scores are written, how the orchestra is used in that music. There was a very, very heavy bass balance. We have always more double basses than celli, almost always more, sometimes even double as much basses as celli in the orchestras. Sometimes the violas, you know, more or less 4, 6, 7, I have some numbers here. Yes, this was actually a pandemic project of mine. I just went through all the old things and wrote it down. So if you see that, for example, if we have a look at Trieste in 1834, 1 cello, 5 basses. At La Scala, the biggest opera house in Italy, or one of the biggest opera houses in Italy, same year. 5 celli, 8 double basses. And so it goes on. Florence, 1840, and we're talking Verdi here, we're talking, you know, really romantic music. 3 celli, 5 basses. And even 1845 at La Scala, 5 celli, 8 basses. That was just a very common idea of how an orchestra should sound. And Galeazzi, for example, is a little earlier, 1796. He still advertises for equal numbers, cello and double bass. So something must have changed in the 19th century that let composers and practitioners, just musicians, be in favor of so many bass instruments. And if we look at Scaramelli once again, the third extract, it should also be admonished that the double basses have 3 strings and not 4 or 5, as in the use in Germany, as the sound of the latter is feeble, in which case it would be appropriate to double their number to balance the orchestra. So, in other words, if you have 5 celli and 8 double basses, but those have 4 strings, you have 16 double basses. So that gives you an idea of how important the bass register was to that music, and it makes perfect sense, because if you think about, we will talk about the orchestral seating now. The basses were everywhere in the pit. They were just surrounding the whole orchestra and supplying the basic, I mean, pun intended, the basic quality of the orchestration to the singer on stage, because let's not forget, there was not a stand-up conductor showing every note to the singer on stage. The singer would often just dictate their own tempi, and to keep track of that, wherever they would stand, they would hear the bass group very clearly. And that is what I think is of a large importance, and I can tell you from experience of having done now close to 10 operas of that repertoire with lots of basses and all of them playing on three-string instruments, it makes all the difference in the world for just the quality of sound and the orchestration, where we would say, okay, this is rather simple, the bass is just playing Pizz or just playing the bass. It makes just perfect sense because it helps the singer and it just supplies the foundation for the music. So we see here also a little bit an earlier seating chart for the theater in Torino. You see the A, the capital A at the left side. That is the violinist director, and that is the old placement where that person would still be on the left side of the pit and directly next to the cembalo, which is the R. And then you see the two C's. The two C's is first cello and first double bass to play the recits. That changed a little bit in the 19th century. So this is 1797. So this would be a pit plot that Mozart would have experienced in Italy when he was doing his.
There are two harpsichords on the other side.
And there's still two harpsichords, and Scaramelli also has very clear ideas about why they shouldn't be two harpsichords, but they got rid of that in the beginning of the 19th century. And there's Scaramelli talks about it. I will skip that. This is 1818, so more into the 19th century, and this is from the Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung, and somebody was there and tells his friends and readers in Germany how the Italians do an orchestra in the pit. And now we have to imagine, all the diagonal names, they are actually, of course, going towards the center of the pit. So there's not a big gap in the pit. But, two clarinets and two oboes sit just, closer together in the middle, because there was no way of typesetting that in a way. But you can see that the Director des Orchesters, who is the violinist, is in the middle of the pit. You have the first violins on both sides of the pit, next to the first violinist, in a row watching the stage, which is also very important because then, again, you are in visual contact with the singer and you can catch them much, much, much better. The second violins are just the opposite. They sit on the other side, or opposite across from the first violins, but looking into the audience. And we have no account of why this was, but my friend and colleague Riccardo Minasi has put on the idea that it might be that second violins often were the pupils or the students of the first violins. So this would be a kind of live masterclass situation in the pit. And
but we've done that with several of us already in the pit.
Huh?
We've done that with.
Aha, good. Here's this is a depiction of
We did that in Semperoper in Dresden and with René Jacobs.
Yeah.
And we found strange at the beginning that the first violin was looking at the scene. But we noticed also that the sound of the first violin is less acid or
yes, exactly.
It's rounder.
Exactly, it's rounder, and still, because you spread them out, still it is very well audible. It's not that you cannot hear the first violins when they sit with their backs to the audience.
And it was very interesting that everybody felt to be on the first row because we are over.
Exactly.
And the activity was automatically, it was no problem to be together.
Yeah.
Everybody is in first row in a way.
Exactly, absolutely. And that is so important to understand also how they were able to put on, a new opera basically every week without much rehearsal time and without much, dictation to that. You see it, again, it's the same pit plot just from a different source. You see how the winds are also facing one another in the second row of the pit, but also being able to look on stage if there is something like a famous horn obbligato together with the singer, there's visual contact, and it works pretty well. I have done, as I said, close to 10 operas now in this setup, and it makes so much sense, and the sound is wonderful because it's just evened out in a way that you don't have this idea of all the treble voices sit on the left side or all the low parts are sitting on the right side. It's very, very balanced out. And with every group that I have tried this seating in that music, everybody was skeptical at first, but liked it when we got into it because it just makes sense. This music is written for that way of sitting. Okay, a few words about recitative. I talked about it already. So what would usually happen is that the composer would play his own second recit at the piano together with the cellist and the double bassist. The double bass would play the low notes, the Grundton, the ground note, and the cellist would play chords. So the cellist would not play the bass note as well, but would play chord realizations, would play little improvisations depending on where you are, and if you have a cellist who thinks that's good, and if you have a music director who thinks the cellist should play more or less. But the fact is that the piano, at this point, there was no longer harpsichords in Italian opera pits. The harpsichord kind of gets exchanged for pianos in the first decade of the 19th century. Sometimes even there was no piano, and so the cellist and the double bassist would accompany the recits alone, cellist playing the harmonies and the bassist playing the bass notes. And we have this wonderful
And without
picture.
figures.
Huh?
And without figures, maybe, or are there figures in the
Sometimes
score?
there are, sometimes they're not.
Rarely.
Rarely, but these people were so immersed in that style, they would just see the note and also follow the vocal line, because they always had the vocal lines, and then you would know what to play. We have this wonderful picture, I hope you can see it. Domenico Dragonetti, the double bass player, and Robert Linley, the cellist. The two of them formed a duo in London for decades. They would play almost all Italian opera that had second recit in London for 30 plus years. They were really a kind of, they always came as a double to the pit. They played the recits for Don Giovanni, for Nozze di Figaro, for all the Italian stuff, for all these operas. And there are some examples which I can give to you if you want that. Somebody wrote out what Linley actually played in terms of figures, and those, let me tell you, a lot of notes. And Dragonetti, as you can see very clearly, plays on a 3-string bass. So that is, that is just what the sound is. And there's this wonderful story, I don't know if you know that, but Beethoven wrote his 9th Symphony as a commission piece for the Philharmonic Society of London, where Linley and Dragonetti already lived. I mean, this is a much later picture, but they were already there. And so the recit in the 4th movement, the cello bass recit, they thought, okay, this is a little too hard for the whole section to play. Maybe we can ask Linley and Dragonetti to play that. So only the two of them would have played it. But sadly, this didn't happen because Dragonetti asked for too much money and they couldn't afford him to play. But this could be a way of playing this last movement with only 2 people playing it. That is something that was considered by the people who performed this piece in London. Okay.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what the strings were tuned from the three stringed bass.
There's a lot of different tunings, and I think we'll talk about this
tomorrow.
tomorrow with Kinnon.
Double bass day.
We have
Tomorrow.
a double bass hour. So that's why I'm kind of pushing past the double bass a little bit, because we are going to talk about this tomorrow. But tunings are a very important aspect of this, of course. And also, as a little spoiler, there's a lot of, taking it up the octave involved if you just don't have the low string.
Do you know if did the double bass play all the recitative or some only in dramatic things or noci persons singing? Or do you know?
What do you mean? Can you say this again? Sorry.
Did the double bass play the old recitatives or only in some?
No, all the recit, all the time. Double bass and cello played all the time. That was just how they did it. And the way we're doing it today, even in modern opera houses, but also in many period instrument productions, in which just there's somebody at a keyboard, is not the usual way of doing these operas. I have to give credit to my friend and colleague Hilary Metzger, wonderful cellist and researcher, who has written a wonderful article about the role of the cello and the bass in Rossini's time in the orchestra. I've worked with Hilary for many years in Teatro Nuovo, but also when we were both playing with Anima Eterna. She has done a lot of research, and this article, I can send this link, it's online, it's for the American Rossini Society, it's wonderful and very the most great overview about this topic. Okay, we have to talk a little bit about tempo rubato, because that is just one of the main aspects of, if I would narrow down performance practice of this style in one thing to look closer at, it would be tempo rubato. I'm just gonna look at my watch. Oh, okay. And this has very, many implications which are very important. Alongside all the necessary understandings and duties thus expounded, a direttore primo violini also requires much intelligence and penetration in knowing and distinguishing the characteristics of the singer, inasmuch as according to the present and modern style, many singers are accustomed to alter the time at their pleasure. Thus, there is nothing but continuous experience in that position in well-regarded theatres frequented by the most celebrated singers that can give the primo violino the ability to know them well and to second them as the case may require. Nor should one believe it can be good to accompany the singer, as certain players claim, in strict tempo, the way one plays an overture and other instrumental compositions, because it is a certainty that, if one will consider the singers of genius and spirit, such as were Pacchierotti, Marchesi, Crescentini, Davide, Babini, Viganoni, and many others similarly esteemed and celebrated, one sees and knows very well that such singers, for reasons of their talent and for certain emphasis and force of expression of feeling, have thought it permissible to take such liberty as they found suitable to the effect of the musical piece they were to sustain. And therefore it would have been nothing but deplorable parsimoniousness and pedantry on the part of the primo violino if he should want to imprison them with a beat with exactness of tempo, rather than second them and allow to emerge the effect of their singing and their talent. So this is very important, because one of the many things that a conductor who is conducting opera is confronted with is the fact that, singers and conductors have often different heartbeats, and contact is not always great. But usually today, in today's business of opera houses, it is the conductor who says, hey, follow me, let's do this together, you're dragging, you're pushing, or whatever. This is the opposite of that. It means the singer is doing whatever they are doing on stage, and we have to second them in the pit. It is our job to make sure that their art and their expression and their feeling is coming through. And interestingly, the singers that he mentions there, Pacchierotti, Marchesi, and so forth, those are all singers that were already no longer singing by the time he writes this, so 1811. They were already retired. So these are all contemporaries of Mozart. Those are people that, I think, I'm not sure if Mozart actually worked with either of them, but he certainly worked with Italian singers for most of his career. And many of his operas, of course, are in Italian, and he worked with Italian singers. So they all come from this tradition of freedom of expression and feeling, and I find that very important.
Yeah, but do you think he's only talking about the melody line, or is he talking about the bass line as well? Because that might be.
We'll get to this. Okay. We'll get to that. But a very good point. Very good point. Okay. Then there are those who have very extensive and agile voices who generally sing many notes and have the defect of accelerating the tempo, particularly in melismatic passages. And in this case, it will be necessary to follow them, given that it will become impossible to hold them back, it being the fact that agility proceeds from movement and extreme movement is not compatible with exactness. I find that interesting. And we see at the bottom here, here is the case in which the students of the primo violin is needed to be able to know when it is time to follow them and when not, keeping the tempo steady. And then, this is also very, very important. One may also give an account of this, even though it is difficult to explain well. It is necessary then in an adagio to comport oneself and act thus. If the singer proposes an embellishment, one must understand what he wants to do and enter into it, and one must comprehend in the very moment of action that if he is taking the liberty of robbing time in one beat or bar, carrying it to another, as is the habit of those who have good possession of musical science, it is necessary to hold the tempo steady, whereby he can regulate himself according to the orchestra, and be secure in the ability to dispose his ideas over the harmony and arrive at the desired effect. In consequence, this will not be the occasion to second him, but no, sorry. Yes, but instead to hold the tempo steady, as was explained. When on the other hand one senses that his ornamentation would not be in any way compatible with the next harmony, and in this it is easy to be mistaken, one must necessarily in such a case second him, which is certainly one of the most difficult things for the primo violino, because in accompanying such a singer it is always necessary that the director be prudent, with mental calm and ready ear, and secure in his business, and at the same moment cast his eye over the orchestra to make himself understood in what he is about to do. I mean, talking about multitasking here. For in the matter of altering the measure, attention must be at the maximum, so that all can unite themselves with the primo violino and go forward together without even a hint of confusion, something that, to tell the truth, is as difficult as it is praiseworthy in a body of 40, 50, or sometimes even more persons. Imagine all of that different every night, because a singer will sing something different every night. Very seldomly ornaments are fixed. And then probably also without having rehearsed the piece, just in the moment knowing, okay, oh, he's spiraling, we need to jump. Or it's a very, very flexible apparatus.
But as I understand this text, he is describing the ideal rubato of keeping the orchestra steady and allow the singers to time to aim his rubato for himself. And then he describes the crisis. I mean, how to manage crisis. So there's the ideal way of performing rubato and the management of the crisis.
And we're talking about adagio here. So it is usually, there's more time to react. The same method is also to be adopted in the allegro, which however will be much easier, since no matter how many variations the singer can make, he will never be able to change the measure as much as in an adagio. And now this is very, very, very telling. Then there are other singers whose habit is to sing, as one says, very much ad libitum, even making fermatas at will because unwritten. In such a case, it is necessary to second them completely, even to stop altogether when they wish it, and making a beat or even half a bar, more or less, as needed, in which circumstance the greatest security a primo violino can have, beyond the necessary attention to the solo part, is that of following the words, the word being certainly a great light by which to direct oneself. So that means, okay, somebody is holding this note forever, we just need to stop the whole machine, if we think back to the broken chord figures, and we will get to that later. Okay, stop, and then we go to the next bar. So this is, I find that very interesting, and he talks from decades of experience already in 1811. So this is when Rossini was just starting out to compose. Yeah.
Two or three questions.
Yeah.
He write that for general singers, or for the good ones only? Because
well,
we know it's ideal, but we know sometimes you have somebody who has no rhythm, and how do you have to react for that?
Yeah, I think in this case, because he cites all these important singers of the past and how much freedom they took and how stupid it would have been to ask him to sing in time, I think he is talking about the good singers here as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
You said before that there are so many tenor basses, so it gives the impulse for the singers, so we might understand or admit that they follow the bass, or they take some liberty, but the bass stays. So with the Baroque rubato, is that like that or not? I'm not sure.
There is many different ways this can go, and I will have some examples of that in which the bass thinks it's steady, but the singers think something else. So I think it's something that is always different, and I think the bass group, because there's so many, is the easiest group to be heard by the singer on stage in that moment. So the singer will orient themselves on the bass group. But if they follow them consciously or unconsciously, as a matter of singer.
Can it be like Chopin or Mozart, that the bass is stable and the right hand is free and is bewusst nicht zusammen?
Yes.
Quasi.
Yes.
Because as bassists, you are killed when you are before the violins or late. You are always shoot.
Yeah, but he describes both situations.
Yes.
There's a situation of an ideal rubato where the bass
For adagio, that makes sense.
steady, but
Where it goes quicker, not adagio, should be more.
I think they're both situations. I mean,
I think he just lies out all the different things that could happen, whether you want them considered good or bad, but those are the things that happened in that time. So I think you know.
And are within the style. They're both within the style.
Yes.
Both situations.
Exactly.
I think that's what.
Last
that's
thing
what I'm
interesting what Sky said in Dresden, I asked him is so for Wagner, most is not so far often tell us that when there is a voice, the words are the most important, so we have to follow the words. But when it's not sung, so instrumental, then it should be everything in order. Then the bass is stable and the
when the singers are not singing in the opera.
yes, and the melodies instrument must have liberty, but in a special.
We have some examples later
that
also in
one
which
too?
instruments take as much liberty as singers. So it's, you know, it is both. There is many possibilities.
Okay.
Let's go to criticism about Italian opera from other countries, mostly Germany. And we have Louis Spohr, who wrote this excellent Lebenserinnerungen. I'm sure many of you know it. It's a treasure trove. And he went to Italy, and we will play Spohr later today, so that's why he's important. The orchestra, composed of the best musicians of Rome, was nevertheless the worst of all that had yet accompanied me in Italy. The ignorance, want of taste, and stupid arrogance of these people beggars all description. Of nuances in piano and forte, they know absolutely nothing. One might let that pass, but each individual makes just what ornamentation comes into his head in double strokes with almost every tone, so that the ensemble resembles more the noise of an orchestra tuning up than harmonious music. I certainly forbade several times ago, at times every note which did not stand in the score, but ornamentation has become such a second nature to them that they cannot resist it. The first honest, for instance, blew once in the tutti instead of the simple cadence. Oh, now the sound bug, I talked too long.
Battery 90%. Connected to MacBook Pro on Jakob.
Good. Okay. Back. Instead of this cadence, sorry, the MIDI sound, the following.
Nice.
The clarinets blew perhaps at the same time. Instead of. And now if one imagines the figured passages for the violins, which the composer has prescribed, some conception may be formed of the bewildering noise which such an orchestra gives you for music. So that's written. I have to say I don't hate this, but you know. And also this is important because we're going to touch exactly this piece. Here, my concerto in the form of a vocal scene pleased most, and I gained far more applause for the way in which I played the song parts, so the slow parts, than for the mastery of very great difficulties. This is interesting. Okay, also, we're going back to what is the music actually showing. Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung. Since almost all contemporary Italian composers do not preoccupy themselves with the meaning of the words, but write their music assuming it will please by itself and by the voices which it is made fit to, one can say that their music gains quality the less one understands the words, the less one gets disturbed with all the ill-fitting, almost contradictory things of the music against the words. Of all these ill-fitting, contradictory things, only one example, a really new one, and by all means from one of the better works. In Naples, one performs the opera of Mr. Carafa, Gabriella di Vergi, and it pleases immensely. The following is one of its main scenes. Gabriella stands immersed in deep sorrow. She has no news from her beloved, whom she knows surrounded by danger. Then a basin is brought to her, which is covered with a cloth, and in the basin her beloved's head. Deathly terror seizes her. Now the poet places the following words into her mouth. Ombra che a me d'intorno pallida ogni orta giri, fra poco I miei martiri sapranno unirmi a te. Pale shadow, who always floats around me, soon my agony will unite me with you. And after she says this, she in fact dies. Here now follows the music with which Mr. Carafa accompanies these words. And as decent as it may be in itself, there's no ultramontaneous criticism needed to appreciate that it contradicts the text as well as the whole situation.
Oh,
I mean, also, I'm so deep in that style that it's actually no longer contradictory to me to have these words sung on this melody. But this is the German view. Also, again, Bellini and Norma, we talked about it earlier. Bellini talks about the contract, beautiful sum, brought nothing meaningful or novel to the table other than ordinary forms and already long heard things, together with the annoying, imitated, in many ways distilled, sublimated, and gasified Rossini singers. As for the singers, the very few good notes that Pasta, her again, still had last year are gone now almost entirely, and she sings mostly as if Spohr or Paganini would play an adagio on a violin with wrong strings. But her good moments are often divine, and in general she pleases immensely. So we're beginning to sense a pattern here. People are complaining about the music, not so much about the way it is performed with the singing. The Court Journal, now for the Brits. We are of the opinion, however, that it will be impossible for the opera of Norma ever to force its way into popularity. Indeed, it is of the most meager pretensions. To the opera of Norma we might listen time after time, and not a single strain would dwell in our memory. I think the world disagrees with that statement. So, defense for the Italian style comes from a very, not very likely source, Richard Wagner, who says, this is a compilation of many different things he wrote over the course of his life. The oldest, most authentic, and most beautiful organ of music, the organ to which our music solely owes its existence, is the human voice. So that's his general statement. Now, they think me an ogre in all that concerns the musical school of Italy, and they set me up in a special opposition to Bellini. No, 1,000 times no. Bellini is one of my favorites, because his music is all heart, deeply felt, closely and intimately bound up with the words. Hear, hear. What enchanted us in Bellini was the pure melody, the simple nobility and beauty of song. Surely it can be no crime to assert this, nor perhaps is it even a crime on going to bed to offer up a prayer to heaven that equally beautiful melodies and as excellent a mode of treating vocal art may at last be vouchsafed to German composers. Melody, melody, and again I say melody, you Germans. So now this is later in his life, because he cannot not be nasty. Despite a certain poverty, there is real passion and feeling here. It only needs to be sung by the right singer to make a deeply moving effect. And here we are. It is on the interpreter, on the singer, on the performer to make this music speak in the emotion that should be depicted. Of all Bellini's creations, Norma is the one which unites the richest flow of melody with the deepest glow of truth. And I think for the composer of Der Ring des Nibelungen, this is very high praise indeed. Also Schopenhauer. It should here be mentioned that the genuinely tragic effect of the catastrophe, the hero's resignation and spiritual exaltation produced by it, seldom appears so purely motivated and distinctly expressed as in the opera Norma, where it comes in the duet Qual cor tradisti, qual cor perdesti. Here the conversion of the will is clearly indicated by the quietness suddenly introduced into the music. So he says the simplicity is actually an advantage. Quite apart from its excellent music and from the diction that can only be that of a libretto and considered only according to its motives and to its interior economy, this piece is in general a tragedy of extreme perfection, a true model of the tragic disposition of the motives, of the tragic progress of the action, and of tragic development, together with the effect of these on the frame of mind of the heroes which surmounts the world. This effect then passes on to the spectator. In fact, the effect here reached is the more natural and simple and the more characteristic of the true nature of tragedy, as no Christians or even Christian sentiments appear in it. And I think, it's exactly the 15 minutes that I'm lacking now, and we have to take a break soon, but let's just look at what Schopenhauer means, and let's listen to one of the earlier recordings that we will listen to. This is right at the end of the opera. The story, of course, the story matters, but the high priestess Norma has 2 kids with a Roman proconsul, so by the end of the opera, the secret comes out and they're both condemned to death. The problem is that her lover already had gone on to the next woman, and now she's saying to him, and these are quite strong words, quite beautiful poetry in my opinion, by Felice Romani, who was of the big librettist of that time. What a heart you betrayed, what a heart you lost, may this horrendous hour show to you. To flee from me you tried in vain, cruel Roman, you are with me. A god, a fate stronger than you, wants us united in life and in death. At the very stake that devours me, even underground, I shall be with you. And this is this page, now sung by Eugenia Burzio, 1903, so a really, really early example. So, for me, if I would just hear it played, you know, on the piano, of course you would never think that this is about death and, you know, and betrayal and fire and all that. But if delivered in such a way, I can absolutely understand why the music is as it is. And also Schopenhauer's word of "this is true tragedy" just shines through. A word about Eugenia Burzio, the singer that we just heard. She was the pupil of a pupil of Giuditta Pasta, so she's like the grand pupil of the first Norma. Of course, you know, 70 years between the premiere of this piece and that recording, but still she comes from that tradition. Reach of that music, because everybody hated it, but everybody heard it. Mendelssohn's time as Gewandhauskapellmeister. In those 12 years, he gave 170 concerts. And I just went to the Gewandhaus archive. It's online, it's wonderful. It's the greatest toy you can think of. It has all the programs and has all the, it's fantastic. Just check it out, it's great. 170 concerts. In those 170 concerts, the composer most played is Beethoven. 106 times a piece of Beethoven was conducted by Mendelssohn. And we see Mozart, we see Weber, then we see Rossini, 40 times played. And then Mendelssohn, 46 times played. So he played more, or played and conducted more Rossini in these concerts than his own works. And if we go to the bottom of that list, you know, I love Hummel, 4 times played. Italian composers in general, you know, the 4 most important, Rossini, Donizetti, Bellini, and Mercadante, and Pacini, those 5, sorry, 115 times was an Italian piece, and I'm saying this is either a duet, an aria, maybe an ensemble, seldomly an overture, but mostly vocal music gets played together with the Beethoven violin concerto or a Mozart piano concerto. There was always there was a vocal element in every concert that Mendelssohn gave, and you know, in a typical concert situation of that time. But so much Italian music, so there must have been, you know, a kind of mutual exchange of that. And Rossini and Mendelssohn knew one another. There's very great memories of Mendelssohn meeting Rossini and talking about that. So there has to be some connection here in the style or in the way melody is formed. Another person which is just so important, do I have to take the break? Yeah. Should I take the break? I'm sorry, it's just the 15 minutes of technical difficulties that lack before I wanted to take the break. But let's take the break now and let's continue after. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We will play quite a bit. Bear with me. There's just so much to talk about. Thank you for your patience. I shall continue with this exploration, and we will get to some, this was, a lot of history, and there will still be a lot of history, but we will get also into what practicabilities there are, what is a way in which this kind of transpires to the repertoire that this orchestra is doing. But first, we have to talk about, we talked about Mendelssohn and his connection or his practical involvement with Italian music. And now we have to talk about this lady because she's just, one of the most important figures in the second half of the 19th century. Pauline Viardot Garcia, of course, again connected to her brother who wrote this famous treatise. Pauline Viardot is somebody who, it's almost uncanny. If you read a biography of any composer or musician of the second half of the 19th century, she is there somewhere. She will show up. Let's look at this. So she was a singer, composer, pianist, and pedagogue of all of these things. She studied voice with her father, who already was a famous tenor, Manuel Garcia, who was the first Count Almaviva in Rossini's Barbiere di Siviglia. So he collaborated with Rossini. As a young girl, she was there when her father's company, remember her brother, voice pedagogue, her sister Maria Malibran, the famous prima donna, she was much younger than her. She was there when they went to New York to perform Don Giovanni for the first time in New York, in the presence of Lorenzo da Ponte, the librettist. So there is that incredible...
In New York?
Huh?
In New York?
In New York, yeah. He lived in America in later life.
And Lorenzo da Ponte went to New York?
Yeah, he lived there. In his later life, he lived in New York. Yeah.
You don't know this?
No!
Good Swedish life in Concerto.
Yes.
Shut up.
So she studied voice with her father. She studied piano with Franz Liszt. She studied composition with Anton Reicher. So this is like a who is who of musical world in the 19th century. And this is just a breakdown of her career as a singer. In 1842, she gave a concert with Clara Schumann and Felix Mendelssohn. She was a good friend of Clara Schumann for all their lives and for all their difficulties and differences they had, and we will get to that. She was a recital partner of Clara Schumann. She sang with her all the time. She was singing in the first performance of Gioacchino Rossini's Stabat Mater, which is a piece he composed after his withdrawal from the opera scene. And she sang not only the contralto, she was a mezzo-soprano or contralto part, but also the soprano aria transposed down, because why not? In 1849, she premiered an immensely important piece, Le Prophète by Meyerbeer. He wrote the role of Fides for her, which is the mother in the opera, a huge part. Nobody can sing it today, it's really, really difficult. And in the autograph of Meyerbeer's opera, most of the places where she has an aria, where this role has an aria, you find Pauline Viardot's handwriting. So Meyerbeer gave her the score, you fill out what you want to sing here. She premiered the role of Sappho for Charles Gounod. Hector Berlioz wrote a new version of Gluck's Orpheus of Fée for her. So he instrumentated it, he orchestrated it a little bit new, he put in different new arias. She sang with Richard Wagner in the private performance of Act 2 of Tristan and Isolde, 5 years before the opera was performed. She sang Isolde, Wagner sang Tristan. And Wagner later complained that she was transposing the high notes down an octave. She gave her farewell concert with Clara Schumann at the piano. And Brahms and Clara Schumann persuaded her to come out of retirement in 1870 to sing the first performance of Brahms' Alto Rhapsody. So talk about somebody who has the range in repertoire, the range in composers she collaborated with is astounding. And her talent, Clara Schumann wrote in a letter, I think to Brahms, she is the most incredibly talented person I have ever met in my life. So she was really a multi-talent, a fantastic singer, pedagogue. She was a composer who wrote really, really good music. Her son, Paul Viardot, became one of the proponents of the Franco-Belgian violin school. So probably we're going to talk about him in the next days, because he left some very interesting recordings. So basically she was everywhere. And here we have somebody everybody loved. Clearly, everybody admired her artistry, and she must have been also a very warm and kind person who helped a lot of people. Nobody ever complained about the way she sang, whether it was in German, in French, in Italian, in Russian. Nobody ever said, well, she's singing in the Italian style, or she's singing in a style that is not really applicable to, The only thing, as I said, that Wagner complained about was that she was kind of taking the high notes the octave down. He didn't say, oh, she sings so Italianate, because she was clearly trained in the Belcanto style, in the Italian style. And she is one of those bridges that I think are very important to what we are going to talk about next. The question, how did the Italian style influence the style of other countries or other national schools of composition? Or is it more of a hen or the egg sort of question? Is it always been kind of two-sided? And just to give you an idea of her as an important figure, here's Camille Saint-Saëns writing about her in his musical memories. Her voice was tremendously powerful, prodigious in its range, and it overcame all the difficulties in the art of singing. But this marvelous voice did not please everyone, for it was by no means smooth and velvety. Indeed, it was a little harsh and likened to the taste of a bitter orange. But it was just the voice for a tragedy or an epic, for it was superhuman rather than human. Like things like Spanish songs and Chopin mazurkas, which you used to transpose so that you could sing them, were completely transformed by that voice and became the playthings of an Amazon or a giantress. She lent an incomparable grandeur to the tragic parts and to the severe dignity of the oratorio. One of the most amazing characteristics of Madame Viardot's talent was her astounding facility in assimilating all styles of music. She was trained in the old Italian music, and she revealed its beauties as no one else has ever done. As for myself, I saw only its faults. Okay, so here we have a non-Belcanto fan, clearly. Then she sang Schumann and Gluck and even Glinka, whom she sang in Russian. Nothing was foreign to her. She was at home everywhere. She was a great friend of Chopin, and she remembered his playing almost exactly and could give the most valuable directions about the way he interpreted his works. I learned from her that the great musicians' execution was much simpler than had been generally supposed. It was as far removed from any manifestation of bad taste as it was from cold correctness. She taught me the secret of the true tempo rubato, without which Chopin's music is disfigured. It in no way resembles the dislocations by which it is so often caricatured. Also, we have to take everything everybody says with a grain of salt. If we listen to Saint-Saëns play himself on his recordings, he uses dislocation all the time as well. So the art of playing one hand after the other. So clearly he meant probably do it too much or something like this. But this just gives you an idea about how connected Viardot was and how much connected really a way of singing was globally. And now let's listen to some things. Let's go to Richard Wagner, composer that this orchestra will spend quite some time with and has already spent some time with. Maybe one of the most Italian Belcanto-ish arias from his repertoire is O du mein holder Abendstern from Tannhäuser. And let's listen to two recordings of that. You will obviously notice differences, but let's also think about what are the similarities. And for those of you who have perfect pitch, yes, the first recording is transposed up because the singer could do it. And it is in Italian, so let's hope this works. Number one. Number two. Okay, observations. Who wants to say something?
Well, quite similar. I mean, I'm finding the similarities, especially in the what I was looking, especially around the first and second systems.
Yeah.
That was slid
Yeah.
in both versions.
Yeah.
And I suspect actually, because of the nature of German versus Italian, you know, like dot to Z, and you have some
Yeah.
Stimmlose consonants which prevent things like that. So maybe you know, portmanteau might be kind of prevented, so to speak, in certain ways, linguistically. But yeah, that did strike me as being very similar.
Yeah.
The legato, of course.
Yeah.
So the German maybe a little bit more true to the rhythm that was written.
Yes, a little more literal to the rhythm, but also it has to do. Sorry, it has also to do with a text note connection in Italian, so sometimes they have to break a line in order to make the word fit. And also, an obvious difference is that the first recording is much more direct, and the singer has a much more kind of a much more placed sound than the second one, which is much more mellow. But in general, would you agree with me, and please feel free to disagree, that the general vocabulary of musical devices stylistically is not that different? Is that something that struck you as well? Because for me, if you listen only to Battistini, who is, I mean, probably one of the greatest singers who has ever lived, and who was actually singing Wagner's music in Italy with Wagner being there and liking it. So we have this, when the first Italian production of Lohengrin, Battistini was young and he was meant to sing the Heerrufer, which is a small but very important role. And Wagner came to the rehearsal and said, no, this guy has to sing the big baritone role. So make him step up and sing Terramund. So that is somebody that was in high esteem by Wagner, but also by Verdi, who said, what did he call him? Il re dei baritoni, or baritono del re. So king of baritones, or the baritone of kings. So this guy was in really high regard, and was, when he died, it was like, a state affair. So that is somebody who's just incredibly influential all over what singing means. He's very famous in Russia. The Russians love him. He sings a lot of Donizetti, a lot of Verdi. Not so much Wagner, but when he sings Wagner, it is more or less, I mean, there's little differences, of course, but it is the same as somebody like Engel, who was a stable Bayreuth singer, who sang in Bayreuth with under Cosima Wagner's watchful eye, and that was really the second generation of Wagnerian singers. So that is very important, I think, to our understanding of what Wagner's music might have sounded like in his time, especially from the vocal aspects. And of course, this is an extreme example because it's really basically an Italian piece, with Wagner's harmonies. It is a song. It's written in a very lyrical, very legato, long phrases. But I have my great colleague Will Crutchfield has sent me 68 early recordings of that piece between 1899 and 1929. And there is not a single one that is not in that general style of legato, phrasing, and connection of sounds. And what I find very interesting, if you just look back at the first bar. So in German it's O du mein holder Abendstern, and in Italian it's O tu bellastro incantator. So Battistini, just listen to the first two notes. So he detaches them, O tu bellastro. While we would perhaps have, thought an Italian would make a portamento there. But what does the German do? He sings a portamento there. So it's, it's not Italian versus German. It's just a choice, a stylistic choice. Battistini wanted to keep it a little more simple in the beginning, and Engel just, went the full 9 yards. So let's just go over a few aspects that, the whole hen or egg question that is very important to what we will do in the second half of this workshop is it really an Italian thing, or is it just a thing of music making? Where can we trace it back to? It's very difficult also for me, because there is so many examples of things in these early recordings that we would, with our understanding, just supposed to be typically Italian and typically Italian opera. But so many things are universal, and I just want to show this with a few examples. So first, this legato. What does that mean? What is it? We talk about it so much. If we look at smooth legato, so this is from the English translation of Garcia's École du Chant, the 1840 singing treatise that was so important. To sing legato means to pass from one sound to another in a neat, sudden, and smooth manner, without interrupting the flow of voice, and he means air, the airflow. yet not allowing it to drag or slur over any intermediate sound. In this case, as with the slurred sounds, the air must be subjected to regular and continuous pressure so as intimately to unite all the notes with each other. As an example of this, we may instance the organ and other wind instruments, which connect sounds together with either portamento or break. This result forms the leading characteristics of vocalization, every other being only a variety used to color it. In order that smooth vocalization may combine every essential, the intonation must be perfect. The notes should be equal in power, value, and timbre. They should be united in the same degree of smoothness. Sometimes vocalization is trembling, indistinct, and gliding, faults which may be cured by marking the notes or, if necessary, by the more efficient method of singing them staccato. So, summarized, if you can't sing a clear legato line, you better sing staccato to hide your faults. By no means should notes be aspirated, and that is very important. Perché mai, not mai, what we hear in so many singers today who sing coloratura, in order to make it clear and to make it crisp, they start putting H's in, just the aspiration. But that is not the way that the old treatises tell us how to sing ever, basically. So the dragged or slurred vocalization ought to be used for correcting this new fault. Legato vocalization, being the most frequently used, needs no sign to indicate it. Pupils should therefore be warned against singing staccato, slurred, marked, or detached any notes in plain passages. So that means legato is order of the day. Everything you see that has not a certain kind of a dot or an accent or whatever is to be sung legato. And that is just the most fundamental thing of that style. And as we have seen with Werner Engel, not only in Italy. He talks about portamento. We know what portamento is. He basically says, and that is also what friends of mine who are voice teachers say, so legato is the goal and portamento is the tool to achieve legato. But that doesn't mean that you always have to have an audible portamento. To give it, again from Norma, because this is one of the quintessential Italian operas, here's 2 recordings which demonstrate what the difference is between true legato and somebody who surely thinks that legato is the order of the day, but just doesn't quite do it. And let's listen to this. This is a more modern recording. This is the great Marilyn Horne, who is so important to the revival of Belcanto in the last 50, 60, whatever, a lot of years. Do you notice the difference? It is, this is one of the most kind of really good modern Italian singers, and I do not want to put anybody down by making these comparisons, and I'm also sure she really plans on singing legato, but sometimes, for example, in the second stanza, the second bar, sorry also for the copy and pasting, the second bar of the second line, where the voice fades in and out and the notes are not really connected and kind of the line breaks. The musical line, the musical phrase breaks, and you can like Marilyn Horne's voice or you cannot like it, but that's something that she just carries you from every note to every note, and you still, at least in my opinion, you can still understand the words, and it's not as if she's just like vocalizing. It's still meaningful, at least to my ears, and tastes differ, but to me, this is just a great example of how this just, you know, with the steadiness of the voice and with the steadiness of performance, this just helps you carry through a musical phrase as well. Yeah.
In the Garcia treatise,
Yes.
the quote just before, he compared the legato technique with organ or wind instruments. Did I get that right?
Yes.
I mean, the organ is exactly not the instrument I would compare a legato with.
Well, I think what he means by the organ is there is a steady airflow.
He means
there is a steady airflow in the organ, and then you just
okay.
press the next key, but the airflow doesn't stop. I think that's what he means.
But it doesn't give a legato. It doesn't give a ornamento.
No.
It's
But
just the airflow.
it's I think he's concerned about the airflow. And now a more extreme, to my ears at least, a more extreme. We are with Wagner again. This is more like a recitative passage. Herbert Janssen, again one of the high-profile Wagner singers between the wars, who would have sung in Bayreuth until the Second World War, but he was an opposer of the Nazi regime, so he left Germany. And then a modern recording again of one of the most celebrated German baritones of our time. So let's again listen to this distinction. Let's listen to what legato means, and then let's listen to the modern equivalent. Difference is quite striking.
Kannst du noch ganz kurz das andere Beispiel nochmal kurz
Ja.
der Textverständlichkeit interessiert.
Yeah, you hear the difference, and again, I can absolutely understand everybody who says, the second one is more to my musical taste or my musical liking. But if we talk about historically informedness, then this kind of heightened expression it sounds almost, the second example sounds to me as if there is just syllables, and every syllable is very clearly understandable, and that is clearly the reason why basically every note drops out and then the next comes in. To me, there's no musical line at all. And, as I said, this is not a value judgment, because this has clearly its merits, and the singer is very famous and, is a great artist. But to me personally, the first example is much more engaging, because you know where the phrase goes to, and you also know where the words go to, in my opinion. And with the second one, each syllable and each consonant is so heightened that you just lose to me at least, the musical connection and also the meaning of the words. Yeah.
Is it possible that the emphasis placed on clarity, that's what I also found so striking, was the second recording, the emphasis that everything's so clear. Is it perhaps perhaps because the orchestral forces with the newer wind strings and steel strings is such a huge, I guess not in this moment, but in general, to even project over an opera orchestra now is quite
Well,
a task.
I should say the way this guy sang is not the typical way a modern Wagner singer would sing. I mean, comes very much from a kind of lieder tradition. This is just this very heightened textual thing, but it's still, it's one of the people that sing this role in the world. So maybe, but I think clarity and modern Wagner singing is more about loudness than about clarity because of these things. So yeah.
I was basically going to say the same. The emphasis was more on diction, because I could actually understand every word much better in the second example.
We should. Yes, that's one thing that will come up quite frequently. But also, we should not forget that in these old recordings, all the overtones are basically not there, and there's no way of really having the same. I would have loved Janssen to sing into the modern recording and then listen. And then
this is why I wanted to hear it the second time. And
yeah.
Even if with the old mics, you could understand the consonants, and it was.
But it's just much more placed in this way of carrying a phrase, and the other one is every. So, and as I said, I'm not trying to make a value judgment. I'm just trying to show. Yeah, and just to give one more example of how normal this was for the composers we're dealing with. Here's Ernestine Schumann-Heink, who was a friend of Brahms. She performed many times with Gustav Mahler at the piano and conducting, and she also was the first Clytemnestra in Elektra by Richard Strauss, so talking again about somebody who was there all the time, at the end of die Saphische Ode von Brahms. But you see the point. It's I always kind of think of olive oil when I hear something like that. It's just every cavity, everything is filled in, and there's always a meaning. Even if she pauses to my ears, there is kind of that's just a heightened aspect of phrasing. And then, as I said, she was just like performing with Brahms all the time. Actually, before that recording, which was done in New York, she talks about Brahms and her reminiscence about him, and then she sings a song. So. Could there be a closer connection, right? And also in instrumental playing, this legato thing was there, as we are recording, you all know, of Joachim playing his own Romanze. You know, even if there is a conscious decision not to play legato, to detach, it's still always within the phrasal, the phrasal meaning. And I find this quite striking. Listen back to back with that. Wasn't the music, I would always know where it's going, right? It's the connection and the flow is so intense. So that's why legato is really important for that style. Now tempo rubato, as we have listened, read in Scaramelli, singers can do whatever they want basically, and we have to second them. And of course we have to listen to some Rossini, and we listen to a very striking example. Just listen and look at the music, and you'll never quite find the same note length or value twice. where I raise my finger in that place where she just stops on that B flat. That made me think of Scaramelli, where he says, okay, and if they stop, we just have to stop. There's no point. We have to wait, and then we play on. So that made me think of that. So I think this is reminiscent of that style. And I can tell you from somebody who's just done this opera with a singer who was ready to do these things, it's so much fun. There's so much fun of not knowing what will happen next, because everybody is so involved, and as you have somebody as charming as Conchita Supervia, then this is great. So a few other aspects of tempo rubato, or tempo flexibility, or changing of time. Inégalité, which we might not, associate with this style, but listen to this excerpt from La Traviata. Mistake, he went into the second verse in there. But you clearly hear that the eighth notes are not equal at all. They also do not really line up, and nobody seems to care. And we have to understand, again, these are singers who recorded, either they are first generation or second generation of actually being in contact with these composers. In this case, Formiti is younger and he didn't know Verdi personally, but still, this is the tradition he comes from. But if you think, again, the Italians just being the Italians, here's Germans in Mozart. That much of an Italian thing then, right? Also, not only in opera, instrumental playing. Here's Ignaz Friedmann with Mendelssohn. Is it always tripletized? Is it dotted? It's not, it's neither. It's always something different, but it has, to me, at least to me, it has a very charming effect. And here's the Klingler Quartet. Notice how the first violinist plays these, the second violin answers, which with exactly the same music, and they play it completely differently. It's tripletized, more or less. Not so much. And I mean, that's not sloppiness, right? This is one of the most kind of foremost string quartets of its time. So this has to be part of the musical language, a conscious or maybe unconscious choice in music making, but still it is part of the vocabulary.
But and they don't, the penultimate bar, they are not together at all, and they meet at the last note.
Yes, they're not together. That's also frequent in these opera quartets.
Yeah, but it's fascinating. It doesn't sound.
It doesn't sound like a mistake. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just part of the kind of the flow and the going. Now another aspect of of this type of performing practice, or about this kind of vocal-oriented performing practice. And also, as we will see, not only restricted to that. Cadential ritardando, I have not really seen a lot of research being done into this, but it's so prevalent, it's crazy, you will see. And I think, or this is also Will Crutchfield who has put me to this idea, that it is in a way connected to poetry when it comes in opera. So we see here a typical line from a libretto, in this case Il Trovatore by Verdi, mal reggendo l'aspro assalto e già tocco il suolo aver, double point, balenava il colpo in alto che trafiggerlo dovea, full stop. And Verdi, a full stop is a cadence in a way, or the end of a line is a cadence. And let's look at the music and listen to how this, again, first generation singer sings this. So it's pretty clear at the end of the phrase, he slows down. And if we look to the third line in the music, where it's il suolo aver, that's also a cadence, and he doesn't stop there because the sentence is not done yet. So in a way that's quite natural. It's very hard to track this to written accounts. There is very little written evidence of people telling you at a cadence slow down. But it was so widely spread. There's another example, different singer, same opera. No trace of that ritardando is in the score, unless we assume maybe the notation is that there is a sentence that stops, right? And that's why we slow down.
Actually, it certainly made me think, speaking of written sources, the Czerny.
Yes, but Czerny tells us to slow down everywhere.
Yeah.
When there's a crescendo, when there's a decrescendo, when you go back to a theme, when you introduce a new theme. Hummel writes a little bit like that. He writes that in his annotation to his own concertos. But it's very rare that I find. I haven't found many sources talking about that. Yes, about this kind of a cadence is like the end of a phrase.
And also in instrumental music, you hear this a lot too. So
we'll get to it. We'll right there. Ferruccio Busoni playing Bach. Here's one of my ever favorite recordings, the Budapest String Quartet, 1928, playing Schubert. And if we imagine this to be a song, because it is a song, Eleven the Maiden, listen to what happens. Personally, I love that. Also, what do the others do? They just play until the end of the bar. They don't try to line up with anything, and they wait, and then they play with it. Knowing that the Budapest String Quartet in this original setup was the principles of the Budapest Opera makes total sense, because they played with the prima donnas and they knew, okay, she's having a high note, and we wait, we do it. And again, here it's always the cadences. And not only in Schubert, not only in string quartet, also in orchestral playing, Brahms' Violin Concerto, this wonderful recording of Szigeti with the Halle Orchestra, and Sir Hamilton Harty. Just the oboe sound is a quiet taste, but you'll see the point. And in the end, it's quite striking to my ears that this is just such a global thing, and we have now listened to recordings between 1903 and 1928, so something like that was in the air. Enough of ritardandos, let's go to the opposite, anticipation. And this is again Eugenia Burzio, the one we listened to in Norma, and this is from La Gioconda. And look at what she does at almost every bar. Do you notice that she's almost in every bar ahead of the orchestra with the downbeat? So that's something. Maybe they just didn't rehearse. Let's listen to Wagner. This is Lilian Nordica at the Metropolitan Opera with Artur Bodansky, a former assistant of Gustav Mahler, in 1903. So this is a really tough recording to listen to because it's a live recording. It's part of the so-called Maples and Cylinders, in which the librarian of the Metropolitan just sat in the audience with a cylinder, and those are the only live recordings we have in that time. But look at what or listen what Lilian Nordica in this famous last scene of Brünnhilde does. So she brings the high note earlier than the orchestra in the beginning, and also the last one, it's hard to listen to, I know, because it's such a horrible quality. Götterende dämmert nun auf. She also brings the auf a little ahead of the orchestra. Do you want to listen to that again?
Yeah.
I can't put this thing louder, I hope it's... Okay. So there's some sort with important words or notes, she just gets ahead of the orchestra. Here's an extreme example of that in orchestral playing. Shunske knows this one, and maybe you already know this. Swan Lake with the LPO and Sir John Barbirolli in 1933, so quite late for our purposes. On every half bar or maybe every beat ahead of the orchestra, but that is just part of the language, because last example for this one, Sir George Henschel, born as Georg Henschel, Die zwei Grenadiere, famous song by Robert Schumann. Okay, so the question is, did they all not rehearse and, didn't line up? Because, you could come to that conclusion, because da hörten sie beide die traurige Meer, bam. Das Frankreich verloren und besiegt und geschlagen, das tapfere Heer, bam. But Sir George Henschel is accompanying himself in that recording. So that cannot be the reason. Did he rehearse with himself? And he was really, this is a friend of Brahms. Again, he played recitals with Brahms. He played recitals with Clara Schumann. When they both died, he played the piano himself. And also, he writes in his memoirs, Frau Schumann always made me rehearse the songs before we did the concert. Even if we already had played it a few days ago, she always insisted on rehearsing them. So I cannot imagine that he would just go away from that style so much and just be like, oh God, she's gone, now I do what I want. So this is just part of musical language. Okay, almost done. Hmm? Oh, sorry, yeah. No.
About all of these things, could it be, I'm just idea here, could it be that this has to do with the modern development of editing recordings, where it became taking the smaller chunks and just getting the perfect parts of it together and losing that overall legato and that overall musicality and all of these things?
Sure, I think this has to do with it, also because you have to do, in order to splice recordings, in order to edit recordings, you have to do it 2 times exactly the same, or hopefully, to make editing easier. And also because, the advent of modernism is just, things together, more square, more, a different view on things. So that certainly has to do with it. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about, and oh God, this was long, I'm sorry. But just because this applies to what we will do with the Spohr violin concerto. Orchestral chords and recitative, to bring them after the voice. This is something that we all know from playing accompanied recit in Mozart and in, everybody who writes accompagnati recits. There are certain notes that you play after the voice, and we have that in Corri, we have that in all the treatises who talk about orchestral playing. But who would have thought that also in Wagner people were doing this? Again, this is Lilia Nordica at the Met. And this is interesting because in every modern performance you never hear the word Burg, because the orchestra is just crashing in and it's a low, quite low in the voice, and you can just never hear it. Even on recordings it's hard to hear. But apparently in 1903 that's what they did. She sings that note that is closing that important moment in the story, and then they start. And the conductor Nicholas Carter has told me that this is even as late as the Karl Böhm recording of Strauss's Salome from, must it be the 1960s? There is a place in which he does that, and the Johannan sings Sei verflucht, and verflucht comes together with a striking chord in the orchestra. Again, a word that you never hear in the modern performances because the orchestra sings. And even Böhm in the 60s was still doing this. So this has to have some connection back to old recit practice. Last thing, also in instrumental recitative, if we want to call it that way, and this is the latest example we are going to listen, and also the last one. Jascha Heifetz, completely different style. We have progressed to a completely different way of music making, 1951. Even though we think of Heifetz as an old kind of golden age violinist, there is a generation earlier that we can listen to, and it's quite different. But still, in that time, in his recording of the violin concerto that we are going to touch in a bit, orchestra and soloist are doing this. Starts when the orchestra's done. example. Like an opera, like you would accompany a singer, and I'm pretty sure that we will do that also when we do it with Shunske a little later today. I am at the end of my long meanderings, and you know what I want to just stress again is my opinion that you cannot clearly say there is something that is typically Italian and only the Italians would have done it. It's so many things are globally connected, and even though all of these recordings are obviously later at you know, as the music that we're going to touch today, that we're going to try out, I'm very sure that many of these things just apply to that style as well, because as we know, Donizetti is, you know, comes earlier in the 19th century, but he's connected to Vienna, he's connected to Paris. He's of course Italian. Then Verdi comes, and then we can listen to actually people who work with Verdi. Spohr went to Italy, and we know what happened there with the ornaments. He imitates Italian style in that violin concerto. He really wants to show this is an aria for the violin. And then Mendelssohn, who was so much, you know, connected to Italian musicians all his life, such a global player, really, such a global international artist, writes this wonderful melody in the slow movement, in the third movement of the Scottish Symphony, which could just have been taken. It's like a Lied ohne Worte. It's such a vocal piece, and I would love that, you know, we try out to find a way in which we kind of implement some of these ideas in that, and see what this kind of does with us and our perception of these moments in the music. I think it's almost, you know, it's almost time to take the break. Do you have questions? We have 6 minutes left. I think we won't start playing now, but if you have questions, please ask them away. And also in the break, ask me everything that you want to. Yes?
One specific one about that, the melismas not being aspirated.
Yes.
I again, just suddenly thought of how even when, like, as instrumentalists, you have a row of 16th notes, you know, you're meant to, you know, at least in the more traditional style, like Spohr, etc., that style, you're meant to mostly keep it on the string. I wonder if there's a link there.
I'm sure.
Or do you know of any like pieces of text that make that connection? Because I mean, like aesthetically speaking, the ha-ha-has obviously, you know, would point more towards spiccato kind of sound. And the, you know,
I mean, spiccato and staccato and picchietato, as Garcia calls it, is part of the vocal technique.
Yeah.
It's there, but it's never in a line that you cannot bring up to speed in legato, that you put the H's in to make it faster. That is just the thing that never happens. And I wanted to put it in, but then it would have been even longer. In Flesch writes about, you know, that must be 1920s, that he writes about, oh, not a single violinist can play legato anymore. They always play portato. When they want to play a melody, they play and they don't connect these notes anymore. So that's, I think there's a connection there with the advent of, you know, more speaking on more kind of emphasis on clarity of the words rather than line. That this comes into instrumental playing as well. But I think, you know, somebody mentioned, I think you mentioned the Marie Soldat recording earlier. This is just a perfect example of seamless legato playing. Even, you know, with all the 16th notes that she has, she just plays legatissimo, and it's still clear, and it's not phrased. And I think that is a famous misconception about legato when you say, please, more legato. It's not this kind of vacuum cleaner thing that gets into fashion with, you know, aesthetics of like the Karajan era, where just every note has the same value and everything is, you know, the same sound. It's not that. It's the connection between the notes that is so important.
Does it mean there is no articulation anymore?
Huh?
Is that meaning that there is no articulation anymore?
You mean in the later?
No, sometimes we have phrase. Does it mean is a phrase or not, you don't articulate? Or what?
Well, this is what I try to show with all these examples, is that when there is a line, if you want to keep a line, within the line every note is connected, but also you can sing a line and articulate words, but still be connected and don't detach the sounds from one another. And articulation, if you plan on articulating, then you articulate. And for example, a K in German, K. You cannot sing a K in legato, so that will articulate. So it's not that everything is kind of mushed together. It's about how the general, you know, the general way of doing it should be legato, and then everything else, and not detached from the beginning.
And also, like, you know, since there's so many agogic things happening too, like it's, you know, that in a way might even fall into the articulation category. If you see what I mean? Like it's there's so much variety even within.
Yeah, and we will try some things. We will try some things out and try to make it legato, but still speaking and still knowing where you're going and knowing that, you know, articulation is a conscious thing. I think that's what it is.
Like, for instance, in the Rheingold, when the Giganten kommen,
yeah.
we have taratatam, papam, taratatam, and later taralawa. And we learn from when you have not a big slur, but a small one,
yeah.
the first note is important, and so it's forbidden for the we may not speak anymore about the tonung, actually, like in Baroque, but taratata is not the same as taralawa, you know.
Yeah.
So it's not important, but it's there. So if Wagner made a difference, we should make this difference or not?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, if he writes, I mean, he's very clear in what he wants, yes, right? So if the slur is going only 3 notes, then the articulation is on the main note. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you pick da-da-da-dum, da-da-dum, pause, bam. You can also da-da-da, bam. You can just connect the sounds to almost the end, and that's how you put the consonants in singing as well.
Because in a modern orchestra or modern colleagues, when there is a slur, so they make like that. So because the bow is used too quickly, I can live with that. But sometimes there is slur, another side, and they do a slur about that, which is not there.
Yeah, no,
and
that
so
shouldn't.
Is the slur maybe there for a little, not as articulation, not as clear as in Baroque, but
yes,
a de instead of me.
We have, for example, in the beginning of the 2nd Symphony by Brahms, this haunting. He puts a slur over every bar, and there's the annotations of Walter Blume, who was the assistant of Steinbach, a conductor Brahms worked with, and he says you should always articulate at the end of the slur. So there is some evidence for that as well. But that doesn't mean that within the slur, that is really legato, and then you articulate, so that both is consciously done.
So a bit like Baroque, but not as accurate as Baroque.
Probably, yeah. And you can listen to that in some early recordings as well. Fritz Busch, for example, he encourages that sort of articulation. I think we are at a great time.
And we're live.
18. Also here, I would like to hear once. To go sooner to the D and still keep the kind of rhythmic skeleton.
Maybe you can repeat at what piece we are. For the stream, repeat what piece we are at.
We are in the Scottish Symphony by Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy, 3rd movement, Adagio. Was habe ich gesagt? 18, 18. Oh. That we think is legato, but it requires even more attention on that. That we don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even if we want to make it kind of a phrasing off, still stay connected between the notes. And let's try this again, 23 and also 26 Just be early. Just be
We
as
really
early as
follow.
you want.
Don't follow. We mustn't follow.
Same place, 18.
Okay, wenn du ein besondere Portamento möchtest, zum Beispiel da liegen.
Oh,
Das war
No.
Ja, okay.
I mean, why not? I mean, somebody certainly would have done it. If the whole group would have done it, probably not. But would they have cared? I don't know. Can we go from 18? 18. But let's kind of break it out of the so that we have this kind of this lyrical element. Can we have just without verses 29 without verses? Legato, you don't. So this is interesting. Oh, that's very contemplative. Let's go from 29 with first violins. And what you did and what I really like is that you linger a little bit on the D and bring the D early. Let's try this. And again, as we have heard in so many examples today, if not every 16th note is perfectly together, that's not a huge problem for today. 29. Nice. Let's answer this and let's go on and let somebody else play a melody. Let's go to 75, bar 75. And now the cello have the melody and the first violins are doing kind of melismatic, organized, Umspielung. And also here, just go crazy. Let's maybe start in D to get the, just get a little bit of Anlauf. Da, bum, ba, da. Dora. basses accompanying is maybe the wrong word. Reacting to it, I think, is the better word. Let's start 77. And Chelly, also for you. So I think the dotted rhythms can be even more dotted, but not in a sharp way, but more in a kind of swinging way. And these connections between the little notes and the downbeat, I think that can be very quicker than what we normally would assume. And then again here with a lot of urgency and a lot of kind of direction so that we know how the phrase is built. Let's try this. 77. Only cello and basses. Yes, can we once really have, because also here you kind of re-attack the little note. So that the articulation is after the note and not before it. Same thing, 77. Wait before the downbeat. Of course. Okay, 82, just this micro moment to just feel that it's not together because it's a mistake, but because there's heightened emotional value to it in this moment. Let's try this. It's great. I think that the von D nach Fis, glaube ich, ist, könntet ihr euch weniger sagen. Also das, weil jetzt warten wir vor dem, also das D hat die richtige Länge. Verstehst du? Ja. Das ist das Problem. Das ist einfach ich weiß, das ist ungewohnt.
Machen wir den Bogenwechsel? Also machen wir den oder?
Nee, ich bin mit dem
Start und einfach wechseln, oder? Also so.
Mit dem Rutscher, ja, vor dem Rutscher. Ja.
Aber nicht, aber wirklich? Oder genau mit dem Rot?
Da fragst du was.
Scheint dir so ein bisschen, ob das überhaupt koordiniert wurde.
Ich wollte gerade sagen, mach mal jeder, wie er denkt, und dann gucken wir, ob das irgendwie auffällt.
Vielleicht noch wichtiger ist das Legato, ne? Das ist wirklich. Was auch immer man tut, leitet es an der Seite wahrscheinlich, ne? Sowas.
Genau, also dass wir nicht versuchen, sozusagen den Rutscher zu verstecken.
Ja.
Das ist aber dieses kleine Mikro-Moment. 82. Da. Can we have 86?
Können wir gleich stellen.
Ja, gerne.
Das ist echt dran gewöhnt. Ja, das ist fest gedrückt. Ihr wart super, ihr wart alle super.
Nochmal 200, ja, echt. manchmal stoppen wir in unserer Bewegung in einer Phrase, wo wir denken, wir müssen den Notenwert halten. Dass gerade bei einem Rubato die nächste 1 das ist, was eigentlich schneller kommt, als man denkt. Das ist so, das ist dieses Paradox. 86, ihr seid auch gleich wieder dran. 86. 86, sorry. Bring the G sharp, I would try to bring it almost a 16th note early.
Wir können leider inzwischen rutschen, dass eine leere Seite ist auf Gis. Also
Ja, ich weiß.
Kann man machen, ja.
Probiert mal. Wir sind mal direkt 90.
In der Vorbereitung zu dem
Von 0 auf. Okay.
was eine Anweisung von allen Fingern rutscht und das dann, wenn man
Okay, versuchen wir das mal. Ja, ja.
Okay.
Ja?
Wo?
Und ja, ich glaube, es ist wirklich dass das Warten auf den Giss ist und nicht davor. Das ist das, was wir, that's what we don't have in our DNA, that we go to the main note and then we wait on it and not before it. That's, I think that's, yeah, can we try this 90? Ja, das ist für mich immer noch, das dauert für mich zu lange von dem A nach dem Giss.
Ich habe schon das Gefühl, ich bin der Erste.
Ja, war gut. In dieser 91.
Oder nicht?
Du meinst auf der 1?
Ja, genau.
Yeah. What I'm imagining in my early 20th century recording grade. Plom. Ja. Jetzt. That was really beautiful, thank you. Yeah, let's go another step. Let's go again from 77. And let's have everybody in except the first. Except the first, for a second.
Oh.
Yeah. 77 without first violin. Sorry. We're getting there. On. In kind of trying to line these first few notes in the bar up, but in the end we have to wait because stuff is happening, and you did that already very well. Let's put in the first, and you kind of go, icing on the cake, of course, but also never play two equal notes, right? 77, or you can start in 78, so join them in 78. my violin teacher always said, kind of following the geography of the notes. So that you kind of go, the line that you see is kind of the line that we play. Or in case of the bar 79, for example, kind of rush it to the long note. Just to try it out, that we kind of give some kind of the shape is always we going to the long thing that is already suspended. This kind of play. And when we get to the end of the phrase, for example, 93, let's try the Budapest String Quartet thing and just play the end of the bar kind of more as a tempo and let them finish and then we unite. And don't try to time the three last notes to their notes. Let's try this. Same thing, 77. It's sounding very, very well. One, this movement is either melody or march, and we are sticking to the melody. 117. First and Jenny have to kind of line up what they do in terms of rubato. And I would just say Cecile is leading the proposals right now, and we just kind of we try to follow her. That 117. two bars in a loop. 146, yes, it's right around 56, yeah. 146, 7 in a loop. Kind of. Yeah, written in G sharp earlier. If we follow this kind of the impulse of that G sharp has to be kind of felt immediately. Now we're kind of still waiting to be together, but let's be.
Ich habe das definiert und das Timing von unserer 1.
Richtig,
ja,
genau.
Das ist quasi wie ein Vorschlag dann. Ja,
richtig. Same thing. That we all want to hold the note that we're stealing from. But I think the note that we're stealing from stealing time from, that is kind of just like a Can we do it one more time? And then we can move on to the next excerpt. Let's still have a kind of defined beginning to that G sharp. That this is clear because that's the impulse. Yeah? Oh.
So welcome back everybody for our final session this evening. We're joined by Shunske Sato, violin. He's our principal guest concert master for romantic performance practice and also an amazing soloist. We've been working with him for very many years. And he's going to be playing the solo part of the Spohr Concerto, number 8, right?
Yep.
Number 8 tonight. Viel Spaß.
Okay, here we are. This is exciting. So this is a piece that Spohr wrote in 1860, just especially for his Italian tour that he did in 1816 and 17. So he wrote something that he said, well, I have to do something, that is not too long. That is, in the Italian idiom. So that's why it's called, in modo di scena cantante, which is, in the form of a vocal scene, of a vocal scena. And I need something that just is not too difficult for the orchestra, because all the Italian orchestras are crap, and that's what he writes in his memoirs. And he wrote this piece, and it was probably, not immediately in his lifetime, but certainly in later generations, his most famous piece, because it's all in all not even 20 minutes long, and it's very, very well done. And until I think the generation of Heifetz, all the great virtuoso violinists had it in their repertoire. It was just a stable household repertoire piece. And then it somehow disappeared, went out of fashion.
Until Hilary Hahn.
Until Hilary Hahn.
who is, basically the only kind of modern recording of that piece is by Leanne. And there's one by Lady Walfish. She also did one on that strings 30 years ago. But so it's not really a repertoire piece anymore, and it's a shame because it's great. And as you will see, it is really modeled after Italian opera. And that's why it starts with a recit, kind of typical Italian, the diva comes in, this kind of. Okay, let's do this. From the top, in 4. So operatic, yeah. Wonderful. Do you want to go back to the beginning for the rest, or do you want to do the whatever you like? Whatever you like. Let's start with the rest. Sure. Let's go back to the beginning. And it would be great to have these quarter notes very persistent and very kind of ominous, but not stopping the action. Bum, 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 so draw us in with these quarter notes. And for the first, for everybody who's playing, can we also here not play the 16th notes equal? Or whatever you think in the moment. Just to make it, it's such a, what you call a cliche operatic gesture, like this kind of, really, yeah, nice.
Maybe also worth discussing, is it on the string, off the string, you know?
Oh yeah. Well, you know, if we go with Spohr's own style, the style that he speaks about in his violin school, like he would expect his subordinates in Germany to play, that would all be on the string. So we just have to think, you know, are we playing like an Italian orchestra playing anything, or are we playing like a German orchestra? I think I always like it to try out all the different possibilities we have on the string, and then if we really think this really feels like I want to play it off, then we can play it off. But in this case, I would rather on the string, but still with a lot of this kind of right hand mancato. Huh? Yes, yeah. And yes, very dramatic. Something is. We don't have a text to this concert aria, but it's dramatic. Something bad happened. So the diva is not happy. So I think that's yeah. Okay, let's do this beginning. And let's phrase to the third bar. Yeah, okay. Yes, and don't phrase off too much. I know it's a slur. I mean, yeah, but if we don't hear the resolution, that's a little bit too much. It's kind of hanging in the air.
Also, maybe connected to that. Maybe this too.
Yeah.
Spohr often talks about stopping the bow.
Yeah.
Rather than lifting or
Lifting it up.
pressing. Which actually keeps that without that consistency of sound. Yeah, it just don't.
And can we still kind of bounce back from the one? One, bum, 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 second, bum, 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 bum. On the second beat of the third bar. Okay. Let's do the piano already on the first beat. Or let's play a decrescendo rather in the just on the last note. You don't have bar numbers, right? Oh. Wow. Wow. Let's go from bar 11 then. Now that we have bar numbers, I bar 11. Okay. And that is really the strongest of the three statements. Bam! this piano passage, and we don't really know where we're going.
Okay.
And then with the crescendo bar 20, let's go back into this old idea of this dramatic impulse. And let's not get tired of the yeah? Directly bar 11. Bar 11. That this is also just a little bit under the main allegro tempo. And Shunske, you can really go bananas in these two bars. And then we decide we have to, as Scaramelli writes, we have to assert in that moment whether what you are doing is capable without us just going on, or we have to wait. So just trick us. Let's go from C, directly C. And we are in this kind of but we are very alert because every second something can happen on stage, right? Sorry. This can sound a little bit more. I probably said we shouldn't be timid with this. It's still melodic. It's like this kind of the chorus asking, the soprano, what is wrong with you? How can we help? So this kind of, very, very comforting. Let's go from there again. C.
And C, we search to have something that is not regular here also, or is it a check? It's supposed to be stable.
It's a generally pretty stable boom chart, but things might happen. So that's kind of
defensive play.
Not defensive. I would say yes, flexible and kind of like have your popcorn next to you. So just yeah, you know what I mean. Okay, see. Nice. chest voice there. I think Jenny bases your notes can be just a little bit longer, just in terms of the length of the note. Can we go from 51? And that is the moment where we go from B natural to B flat, so something more ominous. Yeah, 51. Yes, that's really exaggerated this time. And 65 for the cello when you start. Let's not make an accent here. It's really starting anew from, it's a long crescendo, then also second violin 66, not too loud. Crescendo is only in 67. Let's go from D, 59. As this is something that actually Leopold Mozart writes about. In the final two notes, two chords of a recitative, play them down. That's actually in the violin Schule, so this is the one thing he writes about recitative. Just play two down to the end. Yes, and Chile, if you but between bar 80 and 81, almost kind of analogous to what he's doing in the last moment. I'd love to do this once more. Can we go from 78?
83 is pom pom pom, the pom pom pom, or the 3.
I would say yum tum tum, because we are going from the Grundstufe zur Terzakkord. Zum Sechsakkord. Yum tum tum. Let's go from 78. What was that? No. contrary to what our good upbringing tells us. Yeah? 2, 3. Doesn't mean that the 2 also has to wait. And also then the seconds can bring out their funky little syncopation a little bit more. Okay, let's do it again.
How do we play the fourth line with
See?
So eine Figur, für uns ist nicht klar, also wir haben Pam, 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 und dann hat 2 Tage später Pam, Pam. Würde es nicht sprechen, dass ihr auch Pam, Pam, di, da, 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 in der Melodie ist das diese nächste 1 von Tag 2, nicht der schwer, also der erste Tag ist ein Auftakt für Tag 2. Also in der Melodie, wenn man singen würde, würde man so.
He writes it differently in the soloist and in the orchestra. In the solo it's
ja, er spricht dafür, dass so, musikalisch der zweite. Ja, das wäre.
Let's try this, so that you really start kind of at the.
Und dann bin ich darauf, dann dürfen wir das machen. Das nicht noch.
There is sometimes in Viotti. We have annotations for Viotti by Charles Gonchla, who was a student from Rode. So there's this kind of, again, the grant student situation. And he has sometimes melodies that just start like this. He does a tire poussé with this kind of thing. So, it was around.
Oder der Abstrich lauter als auf ist da Bogen mehr, man ist nicht.
Doch, es ist sicherlich immer noch, der Bogen diktiert es immer noch ein bisschen, aber man kann natürlich, wenn man eine Legato-Linie spielt, genau das zunutze machen. Lass uns das probieren, gute Idee.
Das heißt so was, auf.
Ja. 2, and. Let them live from bar 96. Wenn ihr wollt, ihr könnt es ein bisschen. Let's go from pickup to 95. Yeah, tune, right? That's could be. Auftakt zu 96. And let's have still the feeling that the 1 is the strongest beat in the bar. Yeah. possibly make. And bar 102 and 103, let's not open up too much. That is really pianissimo, that is the singer is in a very kind of awkward part of the voice. That shouldn't be done. Bar 100, without these. That is it. What would be great from 107 is that we get in this state of, what is the best way to describe it? It's not hesitant because you're always going, but it could also always happen something. Because sometimes when we try to accompany and we try to follow, we kind of get a little after the beat because we're waiting for something to happen, but if we have kind of this quiet confidence of that
this is the reason why I suggest to stay on the string. If you lift the bow, you can't react if something is going to happen.
Yeah, we have to just imagine these people on the trees, just looking at this. Time? Okay, but still it's kind of the least effort, I think, the least effort that you can have now is. And the same of course for you, for the offbeat, but that's kind of, you are in an easier position because the offbeat always comes up of the downbeat, even if there's waiting up. You know?
You can stress a little, very little.
You mean you can put stress on? Yeah, you can do that, but in general you're kind of observing. And first, I think the most melodious. Let's go directly from Gustav.
Well, so we do 3 bars before, because it would be my personal desire to put the cutters together.
Okay, then let's do 104.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. So this is a place to follow you. Is it right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, I'm clear, yeah. this last part.
Yeah. Maybe also stop on the third round. What about the bar before? What do you think about that? Maybe go to sorry.
Yeah. If you do that, I would do it a little more.
Yeah.
Okay. Very nice. Let's go from 120. 120. Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
120. And sorry. We are being extremely gentle and cautious, but let's really play the downbeat of 121 quite determined, because he's already going, and if we don't line up perfectly, that's not a problem, because the kind of the phrasing is going across the bar line. 129.
Oh my gosh!
This is how it starts. Very nice before. Let's do H. Ouch. Ouch. I will just be like, no, fake. H. Let's not wait before the one. And let's not do that. Yeah. And is that the intro? Yeah.
On the string or on the string?
I will play on the string. Yeah. And then also something we didn't get to today, but sometimes it's not clear in early recordings whether they play para 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 or bra para bra para or param 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 param. So it could be a param 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 param. Yeah. So let's play with that a little bit. Can we do 2 bars before Ida? Bring it back to the answer. And then as short as you can get them. Yeah, I know it's not the easiest job. Yeah, something like still with grip. Yeah? Yeah. directly enough. So much good. Can you do the what we listened to in the English bit? Bring every downbeat early. To really kind of keep it moving.
I won't take responsibility.
No, I know. I mean neither. But let's go from K again, and then also I really feel this bar before L as a return bar. But already from the one. Yeah.
Ik heb het niet zo goed. Zo,
Yeah, we play it once more. No problem. It's just getting used to it. Casimir? Okay. 139. Der ganze Takt ist ein bisschen Menomosso quasi.
Also wenn man das wieder Quartett, das wäre dann...
Es ist ein ganz bisschen wie das Quartett, aber trotzdem der ganze Takt ist ein bisschen langsamer. Einfach ein bisschen ausgehebelt und dann schneller anders als das Quartett. Weil er den ganzen Takt retardiert quasi schon und nicht erst auf der 4. So, also das ist...
Und wir sind viel zu laut für Shunske.
Ja. Wir dürfen gerne noch ein bisschen leiser sein. Lass uns nochmal von Ida spielen mit der Highlight. Und leicht. The G is really the leading note.
Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, this is fun. Was wollte ich sagen? Ich weiß es nicht mehr. Egal.
And then in the end of 171, the second line is also just killing the note, like together with just much longer.
Sag das nochmal.
The last note before 172, and the second line is stay on that note.
Yeah. Violas and second violins in 171, the last note. If you can just hold it, and then we go to the. Chris, you want to play the bar before the adagio comes back? So this is 165. The Italian audience goes crazy after this. Because that's what Spohr writes in his memoirs. He said, I get much more applause for my cantabile than for my virtuosos. So, apropos clapping between movements. So I mean, it's not on the schedule, but do you want to go on? Because we have some minutes left, and we could just read the rest of the piece.
Yeah, we'll see.
Should we tell the audience when we perform that they are allowed to clap with the audience performing practice?
They don't have to say. Okay. Fun. Yeah. What? Is there anything else that you want to do? We have 12 minutes left. We could also go more to No, we don't have the music.
Oh, we don't have music.
Yeah. Next for the next workshop. To be continued. It's like a cliffhanger. Yeah, in this case, I would say thank you, everybody. You all. And looking forward to tomorrow and some double bass action.